one of my favorite conversations that I've had recently was with a chief data officer, and we were looking at all of the steps of the process that it takes to get data out of all of the source systems, their CRM, their operational platforms, their marketing platforms, these business critical applications, and turning that into analytics. And he and I calculated that the IT organization and the data organization was touching the data 8 times on that journey, right? To get it out of the platform, to get it into their raw, very large data lake, to process it, to bring it through that data lifecycle, and ultimately surface it as a usable data product to their organizational stakeholders. And he asked me, how can we not do this in 8 steps? How can we do this in 2 steps? How can we do this in 3 steps? How can we start cutting out all of this processing and all of this hard work through that process? And it was a really interesting conversation. I didn't have a great answer for him at that time because that was in 2021. And I wish I would have had that conversation with him today, because there has been dramatic advancements, particularly with the ability to leverage some modern generative AI and AI technologies, where we might have been able to have a much more tactical and streamlined conversation. So I think that story is a good example of where we were even just a few years ago. And now there is this ability to get data processed and available for consumption much faster. A few years ago, we were very easily able to take data out of systems like I mentioned earlier, CRM, your warehouse management system, your operational platforms, your marketing platforms. Those were coming out via APIs. Maybe there was file exchanges. Maybe there were database migrations that you could do. Taking that unstructured data, that was bread and butter. That was the operating way of the world. So what did we do with all of the other data that we have? When a customer sends a PDF invoice, when you have pictures, when you have documents that have a bunch of tables and charts and texts that are all mixed together. And so that unstructured data is the area that I'm most interested in, because with the advent and the generation of these modern AI technologies that have come about over the last couple of years, there's a huge opportunity to be able to start bringing that data into the same workflows, the same processing steps, the same pipelines that we have always been able to do with that more structured data. So I think that's a big area of focus for the past, I would say, 1 to 2 years, and now especially going forward into this year and beyond, is what are we going to do with all of this unstructured data that we have lying around, and how do we bring that in? Previously, because we as IT, as data practitioners, were touching the data at so many points, it was very easy to interweave data governance steps into that process, right? Who is responsible and accountable for making sure the source data is correct? Well, guess what? We have checks and balances as a part of that process. Who is responsible for making sure that the enterprise data, how are you going to normalize, curate, bring all of this data together? There were checks and balances built into that process because, again, we were touching the data. So across all of those steps of the process, it was, I won't say easy to do governance, because governance is always a very challenging, active step that takes a lot of organizational maturity to accomplish, But nonetheless, the steps of the process were all there, and it was easy to interject. Again, as I said, those checks and balances, those controls, those quality assurances across the different mechanisms as you're moving the data. There's this interesting paradigm now where we're able to give data stakeholders access to data faster through generative AI, to do it more with unstructured data, as I mentioned earlier, again, leveraging generative AI. And we are seeing a lot of use cases where data practitioners and IT organizations are able to bring data into an AI flow and then output that data for meaningful consumption in the 1 or 2 steps that my colleague and I were talking about. And it's an amazingly powerful thing to do from a development perspective. How does the data governance work in that scenario, right? The traditional mechanisms of having those toll gates, having those processes, having those engineering jobs that check things along the way, those don't exist anymore as you are streamlining that process. So what are some ways that we can still accomplish that quality assurance, that accountability, that product-driven data thinking around, hey, if I'm telling you data about my HR or my HR organization, or I'm telling you data about my marketing organization, who's responsible, who's accountable for making sure that that data is right and actionable? I think first and foremost is, let's not mistake some of these very high-powered AI processes for true traditional analytics, right? I think what we're seeing a lot of is people thinking they can bypass that data-driven decision making and just kind of put the power in the hands of decision makers. And let's just make sure that we're using AI responsibly in that way. We can use it to provide sentiment analysis. We can use it to have people kind of chat and bounce ideas off of these AI systems that we're building. But let's just make sure that we also are still maintaining those more traditional data streams to do very important, like accounting functions and functions that the number really matters when you're running the analytics. But in terms of governance on this unstructured data, we've been finding a couple things working really well. Because of that rapid time to delivery, and because we're able to get the data in the hands of analysts much, much, much quicker, we can shorten the feedback cycle to make it be viable to, instead of doing kind of all of these upfront governance planning processes, right? What's our data quality process? What's our governance committee look like? What's our change management look like? We can almost come into a rapid experimentation mode where I'm gonna give some trusted analysts data. They're gonna look at it. They're gonna help me understand, is that data helpful? Is it harmful? Am I giving the wrong advice to people? Does it look good? Is it useful for answering questions? Is it more useful for just doing experimental research? And getting that feedback loop going and optimizing it is something that we can do very, very, very rapidly now. And it basically is shifting the paradigm to needing those incremental governance steps along the way to creating a cycle of just very rapid and iterative feedback with my whole data ecosystem and landscape. So it is a hugely powerful revolution and evolution to the way that we can even think about governance, and just treat it as more of that rapid delivery, rapid life cycle, rapid testing process. And that's something that we have had very great success helping our customers through. And it really can help the data departments within these organizations become much more agile, which of course has been a goal for data departments for quite some time and has yet to be fully realized. As a data practitioner, I'm just so excited and grateful to live in the 2025 world where we have these amazingly powerful data processing tools where we can bring in unstructured data, shorten the time that data becomes available, at least in a beta or a initial version, to analysts, and really just broadens the way that we can interact with data using generative AI and kind of human chatting interfaces alongside of, and equally important to, the more traditional data processing and data analytics space.